going to make banana bread. The first way that we'll make it is just the standard traditional way. And if you're having this one, this is one you would want to eat using the dessert flip, where you're having, a smaller piece and then having something else healthful with it as a dessert or breakfast. And throughout the course of this recipe, I'm going to explain a few important baking techniques to just ensure that you get light, fluffy baked goods that aren't, flat and dense. We'll try and eliminate some of the common things that people run into in terms of difficulties with baking. So the first things that we want to do are preheat our oven. So we already have our oven at 350 degrees. And then I'll show you a trick if you've ever had trouble getting things out of a pan, or you have these very well-loved pans like I do here. You can see it's seen better days. So if you take your pan and then you take either, you can rub it with some kind of oil or use a non-stick spray, which is quick and easy. Just want to give it a quick coating. And then you can take a piece of parchment paper that fits in your pan. It doesn't have to cover every bit of it. It could even just be a thick strip. And then that non-stick spray will help it stick. So you just want to kind of press it into the pan. And then you have little handles to lift up your banana bread when it's done. So you can lift it right out, it won't stick. And then, so a bit about quick bread. So banana bread is a quick bread, and a lot of people get confused between cakes and quick bread. So other quick breads would be muffins, scones, any sort of fruit breads like this that you'll see. But where things get tricky is that if you're out at a store and you buy muffins, for example, most of the time you're actually getting cake in a muffin shape, and that's why they're not particularly healthy. So the difference between cake and quick breads is really the amount of sugar to flour ratio. So cake is usually about equal parts sugar and flour, if you can believe it. So by weight, you're having half and half. And then quick breads are definitely a larger proportion of flour to sugar. So definitely a healthier option. And if you want healthier muffins, you pretty much always have to make your own. There's not too many out there that aren't cake. And usually when you're making any sort of quick bread, you will have a bowl for dry ingredients and a bowl for wet ingredients. And you don't have to sift your dry goods together, but if you do, it gets out any lumps, it lightens everything up, so you'll end up with a fluffier product usually. So I just tend to sift together everything that's dry. So I have a couple cups of just white all-purpose flour here. And then we have leavening, so we have some baking soda and baking powder and a little bit of salt. And then, so I don't have to stir it in later, we'll put our cinnamon in as well. And then I just have a fine sieve here and I'm just going to tap it. There's also special flour sifters that you can get. I tend to try and figure out ways to use kitchen equipment that I already have in additional ways rather than, say, buying a flour sifter. And so I really like this, and then you can also use it to strain things. And sometimes if it's really fine, the salt won't go through, so you just have to dump it out there afterward. If I didn't have something to sift with, the other trick that you can use is just put all your dry ingredients in a bowl and then whisk it until everything looks like it's mixed together. That's the other way to do that. Set that off to the side. Now we'll do our wet ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and crack a couple eggs. So I get asked questions a lot about cracking eggs, so I tend to tap the eggs on a flat surface. I don't crack it on the edge of the bowl. What you do when you're cracking an egg on something that's inserting into the egg is that eggs do tend to have a little salmonella on the outside, so you're going to get a little bit of that inside the egg, so you're less likely to get as much contamination into your baked good if you tap it on a flat surface and then just crack it apart with your fingers and pour it in. All right, so we have our egg. Just kind of break up the yolks a little bit. And then you usually want to whisk in really well, either by hand or in a mixer, your sugar. So we have some brown sugar. And when you measure brown sugar, you want it to be packed. So you'll pack it into the measuring cup. Whereas other things that you do in baking, you just would lightly spoon it into the measuring cup. You don't pack in flour, then you'll end up with way too much. And in fact, in professional baking, they don't measure with measuring cups any of the flour. They'll use a scale and weigh it so that you don't end up with too much. So this is white sugar I'm putting in now. You might think, you just said we're gonna put together our wet ingredients. Why are you putting dry things in there? It's because the sugar will dissolve in our wet ingredients, and that's the best way to incorporate it into the recipe. I'll go ahead and add some canola oil. Yep. It's okay to make messes when you're cooking. And some pure vanilla extract. Okay, and now you can see that it is, not well mixed together. We're just going to mix it until we get that well incorporated. Other quick things that we're not going to make in the session are cookies, for example, and you'd always want to mix whatever your fat is with the sugar until it actually gets a lighter in color and fluffy, and that will give you a nice texture. Good way to work at least one arm muscle. If you're ambidextrous, maybe you can get a good workout baking. Me, not so much. Gotta do some more work with my left arm later on. Okay, so that's pretty well incorporated. And so now we want to add our bananas. So what you can do is you can use a separate bowl and mush them together, or you can kind of mash them in. And so I'm just gonna get messy and mash this with my fingers. You can also do this first if you want to just put them all in the bowl and just get a good massage in with the bananas. Good therapy. Other people really don't like the texture of smushed bananas in their hands. So if you don't like this texture, you can also freeze them ahead of time, and then you can just whisk them in there. It kind of makes them mushy. If you can, finding bananas that are nice and brown, like these, are the perfect type of ripeness to use for banana bread. A lot of the sugars have developed is going to make a sweeter banana bread. It allows you to use less added sugars. If you have underripe bananas, it's okay, you can still do it. You just might want to add, a tablespoon or two of extra sugar to balance out the flavors. It's one of the ways I can tell people who are used to being in the kitchen or not is how comfortable they are getting messy. So in terms of reducing food waste, doing these recipes, maybe with some of the healthier changes I'll show in a minute, is a good way to use up bananas that are kind of past their prime. Okay, so now we're just going to mix the bananas into our wet ingredients. If you really don't want to touch them, you can also put them in the blender and make quick work of them that way too. It's just more dishes to wash that way. And it's okay if there's a few chunks in there. It actually, having some fully mixed in and a few little chunks adds a nice texture. And so now is where one of the most important steps comes in for making a tasty quick bread, and that is not overmixing. The same thing that I'll show you here with the banana bread is true of things like waffles, pancakes, and then of course the muffins and other quick breads I mentioned before. So really, most people just very, very, very overmix these things, and that makes them flat and dense. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I'm just going to pour the wet into the dry here. Is that, if anyone's familiar with making bread, you knead it and knead it and knead it to try and develop the gluten to make it have those chewy strands of protein. And when you want, a nice light fluffy baked good, you want the opposite thing to happen. So you want to mix as little as possible. And so I would never whisk at this point. And I think most people, when I'm teaching them, even if I say this ahead of time, that whisk is out, they're whisking away. But use a spoon or a spatula, and then if you've ever seen in a recipe folding, I actually do more folding. You can stir a little bit too, but folding is just to scoop out across the bottom of the bowl and then kind of flip over and flip up. That helps to make sure that you don't have a bunch of dry stuff on the bottom that you're missing while you're mixing things up. And then once you have things starting to be incorporated together, then you can stir a little bit more. But the goal is really to get it where there are just a few little clumps of flour left, that it mostly looks mixed together, but that it's not, that every little piece of flour is gone, because at that point you probably overmixed it. And you can certainly do this with, say, a KitchenAid mixer or an electric mixer. If you want, you just might want to pulse it and, not walk away and let it go. So, all right, so there's a few little spots of flour in here, not too many. They're mostly gone. So I think we're at a point where we can put this in a pan. And this is another time when these plastic scrapers come in really handy. And so then at this stage, you can kind of shake the pan to level it out if you want, or you can spread it around with the spatula. Just want it even throughout, otherwise it will tend to bulge a little in the middle and then the edges burn a little bit compared to the rest of it before it's done. I have the walnuts off to the side here. This one I'm gonna make without, but you could have, right before you finished stirring everything together, you could have added the walnuts. That will give it some nice omega-3s, healthy fats. It will also help to reduce the glycemic load, meaning anytime you're adding anything with fat, fiber, or protein, which are all included in nuts, it will slow down how quickly you get a blood sugar spike from your banana bread. So that's one healthful addition that you can add. I'll make the other one with that, and then we'll also make sure to show it to you when it's cooled and sliced. So here we have our banana bread. I'll just show you how to test for doneness. It tends to get, depending on how ripe your bananas are, it could be very different in terms of the color it is when it's actually cooked through. So you can't use the color to depend on knowing exactly when it's done. So the easiest way to check either cakes, muffins, banana breads, quick breads is just to take a plain old toothpick, and just a standard toothpick, and insert it. You can poke straight down in the middle, it will leave a hole. So if you want it to look nice, I usually find a little crack or crevice and poke in there. You want to get into the center of the baked good that you have and then pull it out. This one's totally dry, which you know that it's done. If it had some little dry crumbs on it, that would also be done. What you don't want to see is wet batter. So if you see wet batter or moisture, then it's not done. And I've actually, we'll have this sit for about 10 minutes and then we can pull it out, and you'll see that it's very easy to lift out with our parchment paper. So I mentioned earlier, having this parchment here will allow you to lift your quick bread out of the pan. Sometimes it's nice to have a butter knife or another knife handy if the parchment isn't touching all of the parts of the pan. But we can just go ahead and grab these handles we left and lift it straight out. You can see there's no sticking, super easy. I actually didn't even loosen the edges, it just came right out. And we have, this is cooked really nice and evenly. You can see the parchment just peels right off. It doesn't stick at all. And you want to peel it all the way off so that you have your bread here, and then you want to put this on a cooling rack. If you put it on a flat countertop or a cutting board like this, then the moisture is going to take away that nice crisp crust that you worked so hard to achieve. So again, you want to open grate, set this on a cooling rack. This is going to elevate it a little bit off the countertop. It gives room for airflow underneath. That's important in maintaining a crisp crust. You want to do that with cookies, any other baked good. If you have smaller items and not a whole loaf here, you'd want a cooling rack that has smaller space between the little slats here. So not as big. You can also double your oven rack, as long as it's not hot, as a cooling rack if you don't have one at home.